Stalemate between the ruling ZANU PF and its opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change, has stifled the advancement of healthy democratic processes in that country. In December, former South African President Thabo Mbeki was in Zimbabwe at Mnangagwa's invitation. Mbeki met the two presidents, ZANU PF's Emmerson Mnangagwa and MDC's Nelson Chamisa, separately. Subsequent to the meetings, President Mnangagwa met with the leaders of opposition parties, but the MDC was not part of the meeting. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe is dealing with a deepening economic crisis, which is now compounded by the worst drought ever in the region. Nelson Chamisa, president of the MDC, is in South Africa seeking political solutions to the Zim crisis, and he's stopped in for a conversation. Good to see you. Thank you very much for your time to be here.
Thank you, Leah.
So let's talk about why you're here and who you're going to be talking to in South Africa to assist.
Well, thank you very much. I'm in South Africa basically to mobilize regional solidarity within SADC, but also more importantly in South Africa, amongst the civic society, amongst the political actors and the key opinion leaders, to make sure that we find the help from South Africa to help ourselves. What we basically need, we are at that point of need where we need all our friends as Zimbabwe to assist us in partnership to resolve our own problems. We have to ultimately resolve our issues as Zimbabweans, but we need to be helped to help ourselves.
Ideally, where can South Africa come in and assist? Ideally, from your point of view.
Well, the most important thing is to understand the nature of the crisis in Zimbabwe. The crisis is a governance crisis. A governance crisis which is a political crisis born out of a disputed election in 2018, which has basically given birth to a legitimate crisis around the one who occupies the office of president. And that crisis can only be resolved if there is a political dialogue between the key political actors. And I've offered myself on behalf of the MDC and the Alternative Voice. 2.6 million people voted in the election to say they would want the MDC to lead. But of course, there were disputes around the election. We went to the Constitutional Court. It decided otherwise. We disagreed with the Constitutional Court, and we've emphasized that the voice of the people in 2018 must be given effect and full effect for that matter. Yeah. So for that to happen, there has to be political dialogue. And that political dialogue has to be done in the context of SADC, in the context of South Africa helping us as the mediator to give a credible, irreversible, and irrevocable path to a return to legitimacy and democracy in Zimbabwe.
So we know that in December, the 3-hour discussions were held with former SA President Thabo Mbeki. How did that help? What were the discussions there, and did it assist in any way?
It did assist in a way because it is trying to attack the root of the problem. I've said that the problem is a governance crisis, a legitimate crisis. And what is important in our own view is that we have seen President Mbeki coming in the context of the help that he wants to give for us to have political dialogue. And we have clearly said we are open for dialogue. We want to give peace a chance. We want to give dialogue an opportunity so that we create hope for the people of Zimbabwe, so that we have a fresh beginning and a new start. But this can only be possible once we have addressed the fundamental issues of reforms, issues of nation building, national healing, and returning to legitimacy and democracy, especially in the context of the disputed election in 2018.
Where the transition between the now sitting president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, and the former president, Robert Mugabe, how is the situation? Many people say that the situation in Zimbabwe has deteriorated even further. From your perspective, how is it looking?
Well, many hoped in 2017 that we would have a new chapter, a new page, and would have turned the corner. Unfortunately, if we have turned the corner, we have actually turned a corner in reverse. We've actually gone backwards. The situation has gotten worse. What we now have is a totally failed state. What we now have is a totally failed system, erosion of salaries of workers, pensioners. We have situations where we have blackouts, electricity outages. We do not have fuel, long queues of fuel. Everything has collapsed. In fact, nothing works. And that is the legacy that we have seen, to the extent that people are beginning to even miss Mr. Mugabe, something that we never imagined would happen, that people would begin to say Mr. Mugabe's days were better. And that is what is now happening. That is just to dramatize how dark our chapters and pages have been going forward.
There has been a move from President Mnangagwa wants political issues to be discussed via the Political Actors Dialogue platform. You, however, don't want to go this route. Why? Why do you not want to get engaged?
Well, we don't want to be led up a garden path. We don't want a dead end for political dialogue in Zimbabwe. Dialogue has to be genuine. Dialogue has to be credible. Dialogue has to have bankability and credibility in terms of its outcome. We want to resolve issues in Zimbabwe. We've had 2 decades since the early 2000s of problems upon problems. We've never resolved those outstanding issues because we've been engaging in dialogue without any desire to fix the issues. Pollard is a sham process. Pollard is a poisoned space because it is men and women, political parties created by Mr. Mnangagwa to give a false sense of a dialogue that is taking place. So we don't want to jump into a situation where we are swimming in a crocodile-infested river because we will not have an outcome that is good for the people of Zimbabwe. So what we would want is a genuine dialogue between ourselves and Mr. Mnangagwa, not the Pollard platform. Pollard is infested with people who do not have any representation. These are just people who have just been picked to come and be part of a process to try and drown the voice of the alternative, to try and drown the voice of the people, to try and empty the vote of the people in 2018 of its effect.
Yeah.
So we are not going to waste a lot of time. We want genuine dialogue.
This stalemate between the 2 parties in Zimbabwe, this has been ongoing for years. I mean, we go back to the years of Morgan Tsvangirai and Robert Mugabe. It was almost the same narrative, and now we're seeing the same thing unfolding between the 2 leaders now, the 2 of you.
Indeed.
What could have been done differently? Why is this narrative continuing? We've got 2 different role players now that we thought maybe things would get better.
Thank you. Our hope when we then had the transition post the Mugabe era was that we would have a transitional mechanism. And this is what we are now pushing to say, going forward, what we're supposed to do better in 2017 after Mr. Mugabe exited the stage was to then have a transitional platform that would entail and include all the political actors, the MDC and ZANU PF being the major political players, and then pave way for reforms, pave way for comprehensive electoral reforms, constitutional reforms, and indeed fundamental reforms around the election, so that we are then able to move to the next stage to prepare for credible election. That did not happen. In fact, we then saw ZANU PF going solo, doing their own thing, to the detriment of the nation, also to the jeopardy of inclusivity. And that is what we are pushing for, to resolve the issues in Zimbabwe. We have offered a 5-step solution. Let us deal with issues of the definition of the crisis in Zimbabwe so that there is a shared understanding, a consensus of what the problem is. ZANU would say it's economic sanctions. We are saying it's politics stupid. It is the governance that has to be fixed. It is ourselves as Zimbabweans that have to solve issues. Number 2, let's have comprehensive reforms that will be able to give effect to the voice of the people so that we turn a corner around the politics of the past, so that we have a fresh beginning. Thirdly, we have nation building and national healing, so that we are able to come together as a people and begin to identify ourselves and move forward, looking at our liberation ideals, our liberation legacy, and what we wanted to see. Number 4, let's then have national engagement, because we can't have national engagement that is not backed by international engagement. So those 2 have to come together. Last but not least is the humanitarian situation in the country that has to be resolved so that we are able to fix the key questions faced by young people. Look at what is happening in South Africa. A lot of young people are coming to South Africa. South Africa has to bear the burden of looking after the young people. We would want to make sure that we fix Zimbabwe in order for us to fix SADC. We fix our home so that our neighborhood is not up in flames.
How many people do you reckon at this point have left Zimbabwe, have left the country, come into South Africa, because we know that we do have a lot of Zimbabwean nationals here that have just left the country because they see no hope?
Reports indicate that we have 4 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora. In South Africa, possibly 1 million plus, if not 2 million.
Yeah.
We are yet to ascertain the actual figures, but it's a huge brain drain, and we need to fix this problem. Now, we've realized that a Zimbabwe that is burning is going to set ablaze the entire region. It's not just South Africa, it's also Botswana, it's Mozambique, it's Zambia. So it's important to cure the sickness of Zimbabwe, because a sick Zimbabwe is definitely going to spread the virus for the entire region and indeed for the entire continent. And this is why we are pinning our hopes on South Africa's leadership in the AU. We are also pinning our hopes on South Africa's prominent role within SADC to make sure that we have African solutions to African problems and Zimbabwe is resolved ultimately.
Mr. Chamisa, I'm going to pause our interview here. We will continue this and pick it up, but you mentioned the word virus. Coronavirus is a big worry in the world right now. We're actually having a press conference. You can listen in with us. We're just going to go and turn our attention now to our health minister.